Welcome back, friends of Tidepool Press, to our Gilgamesh read-along. Today I'm going to say just a few words about the first four tablets of the epic, the beginning third or so, and go over some of the themes and problems that the text gives us. Before we get started, I thought I'd just say a little bit about the hardware of the epic, as it were, by saying just a little bit about texts and language and the historical situation here. So I'll begin just with a question of, what are we looking at when we say we are reading a cuneiform tablet? Well, here's a handy picture of one. This one actually happens to be tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic, containing the episode of the flood story, which makes it one of the most famous pieces in the British Museum. As you see, the sort of neat arrangement of the script makes it very readable if you do know what you're looking at. And notable is the fact that it doesn't really have a monumental size. So I think sometimes when we hear that we're reading a tablet, we think of this enormous Moses-sized thing. But this tablet, for instance, is about 5 by 6 inches. Maybe if the bottom wasn't broken off, it would be 5 by 8. It's not much bigger than a paperback book that you might be holding. And you can see as well that it presents some of the problems we have in reading, such as the breaks in the text. Well, that means quite literally that where the text is literally broken. One fun thing in the epic is when tablets themselves actually make an appearance in the story, as in tablet 1, lines 24 to 28, when they open the tablet box as a sort of once upon a time statement. Here is where our story begins. I'll say just a couple of words about the formal nature of the text, because it reads a little bit in an unfamiliar way, mostly having to do with repetition. You'll see there's a great deal of repetition, not only from stanza to stanza, but across wider structures of the epic. This is largely due to an attempt to reinforce important points. This is a normal formal element of Akkadian literature. It also has a kind of performative quality insofar as there are call and response sections, conversations where one person will state something and the responder will answer it in an affirmative, but using almost the same language. And this kind of framing, this mirroring, is sometimes arranged across the text as a whole, such as the passage in the beginning of Tablet 1, which describes the size of the city of Uruk, also has the same language showing up at the very end of the last tablet, Tablet 11, as the conclusion. So it's very book-ended there. In case you're curious, one very nice thing about ancient Akkadian is that we have a very solid command over how it sounded. And so this link should take you to a place where you can hear Martin Worthington from Cambridge University reading a selection from Gilgamesh in the Akkadian, just to give a sense of the text as a lively, living thing. I've already mentioned a bit about Uruk in the previous video, the city where the epic's opening action takes place. The city of Uruk in the 4th millennium BC was a real place that we know quite a bit about. It was the largest city on Earth and would remain the largest until the Rome of Augustus, so quite a big place indeed, where we have early kingship, temples, the first writing, and a number of other institutions. Just some shots of the ruins there. Obviously, a place which was once verdant and green and supported populations of hundreds of thousands of people, now in the middle of the desert. So quite a far way away. One last thing worth noting is that we also have good information from the 3rd millennium BC about the assemblies that you hear about at the beginning of the Gilgamesh epic, with the elders and the young warriors sort of pitted against each other. These probably correspond to very real constituencies that early kings kind of had to juggle. And this depiction here from two different sides of the same art object, which comes from the city of Ur, shows on the top the king banqueting with his elites, who might correspond to these elders, and at the bottom as a war leader among the young men. So just to give a little bit of a sense of how this looked and felt to them. All right, so let me say a few things here now about the epic and its plot, really. The plot of the Gilgamesh epic sets up a series of contrasts and conflicts and choices which ultimately have to do with knowledge. And that can be a bit of a surprise, since we tend to think of epics as stories which have to do with heroism as a matter of battle and combat. But the heroism in Gilgamesh is really grounded in this quest for knowledge, a quest for knowledge about the hero's self, about the human condition and fate, about the world and the gods. And combat is really ancillary to the story. For instance, the famous fight between Gilgamesh and Enkidu in Tablet 2, which is actually missing, is probably only about 35 lines long. So we even begin by missing one of the 3 battle scenes in the whole epic. Later we have, in Tablet 5, the long combat against the monster Humbaba, and in Tablet 6, a shorter battle against the Bull of Heaven. Altogether, these combat narratives occupy maybe 300 out of 3,000 lines of the whole text, about 10% of the whole. So battle really isn't at the center of things. It's just a narrative device that's used to put forward a series of contrasts which are ultimately about how much a man can know about the world and what he can do about it. So the first contrast we encounter is the one set up in Tablet 1 and then ultimately resolved in Tablet 2 between the civilized but unethical ways of Gilgamesh, the king, willful, chaotic, violent, selfish, and its contrast to the ethical but uncivilized, natural ways of Enkidu. The civilizing of Enkidu is a transformation through social and self-awareness in adopting practices largely related to the body, not only his sex with Shamhat, which may capture our attention as a kind of heroic feat of its own kind, but in his adoption of clothing, of civilized food and drink, of grooming himself. So here's a choice for civil social knowledge which comes at the price of losing connection with nature, which has its own rules. The other transforming moment here comes in the combat between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, which is ultimately an act of comparison and likeness, a drawing of boundaries. It's a sort of mirror stage where the hero begins to realize some of the limits of his human condition. Even if he is 2/3 God, he's not the only hero on the block. So it begins here in these first tablets that Gilgamesh realizes the limits, but it'll take the arc of the entire epic for him to gain wisdom and really understand the limits and possibilities. The next contrast emerges in tablets 3 and 4, where the 2 heroes resolve to go and fight Humbaba. Once again, although the battle described in tablet 5 is kind of a blockbuster, what tablets 3 and 4 set up mostly has to do with acquiring the wisdom necessary about the nature of the heroic thing to be done, about who Humbaba is, where to go, whether and how to do it. Is it right? And in these passages, a great deal of narrative effort is devoted to the interpretation of dreams, of appeals to the gods, attempts to understand the enemy they'll face, and even the territory that lies before them. And that leads me to say a few words about the correlation between what I think is the real thematic center of the epic, knowledge, and the narrative engine that really drives it all the way through, and that's the journey motif. Now, the observation about journeys and heroes is hardly unique, but I think what's important in reading myths like this is to understand what a journey really means in that culture's own terms. To do this, let's go back to the very first line of the whole epic, which begins by describing Gilgamesh in these words: he who saw the deep. Now, you may be holding a translation which says something different, something like, he who knew everything, the one who had all wisdom, or something like that. Now, the advantage of that translation is that it gives you a really correct understanding of what seeing the deep means, but only superficially. You lose the kind of poetic edge, and that has some meaningful aspect to it. What the text literally says here is that Gilgamesh, unlike normal men, had seen into a cosmic realm of sweet water that lay deep underneath the earth, called the Apsu. He saw the Apsu. And that watery deep was a primeval well from before recorded time, in which the gods had hidden all scholarly and divine knowledge. Particularly important scholarly compositions and ancient sages were literally said to have come from this deep well place, somewhere below, and from some time in the deep past. So the knowledge that Gilgamesh is said to have gained isn't just the kind of wisdom you learn in school, but profound, divine wisdom on which the world literally sits, is founded. And understanding this kind of motif is key to reading much of Gilgamesh as a journey story, because when the hero journeys out to the edges of the world, he's not only crossing heroic tracts of territory, although that's also true, as his epithet says that he's one who's seen a far road, and there are these great descriptions of the heroes striding for leagues across the land, this enormous pace. But Gilgamesh travels uniquely through a matrix of time and space that brings him closer to the past, to knowledge, and the realm of the gods as he approaches the edges of the world. So when we read about Gilgamesh going to mythical places like the Cedar Mountain, or the land of the setting sun, or he dives to the bottom of the sea, we have to understand that what this signaled to Mesopotamian readers was that he was passing out of mere everyday historical here and now to just another historical then and there, but deep into a past which was physically made up of divinity and wisdom. And that's a past that he's going to try and bring back to mankind in the form of immortality. Now, that theme of kind of a journey of knowledge is reflected at least three levels in the text. So first of all, I'll say there's this broad background spectrum of unknowable divine wisdom, the plans of the gods, in which the entire story is set. This is a level of wisdom that Gilgamesh will ultimately be denied. But below that, we meet a kind of middle level, where at many turns we encounter what might be called scholarly or esoteric wisdom, recourse to which the hero makes repeated appeal. He tries to understand the world through dreams, through omens, rituals, prayers, other kinds of knowledge arts in which he tries to communicate with the gods, things that men could know, or at least ways that men could ask to know. And what intrigues me personally about the Gilgamesh epic is how often and how much action in the epic not only involves these knowledge arts, but how much of that really is about asking questions, and how much the answers to those questions require interpretation. So it's not a story which is about confidently setting forth the answers to the universe and the way everything is. It's got a lot of question marks in it. And that's kind of the tone of the whole story, is the anxiety of not understanding even the problem, maybe. So, and then finally at the base level, the epic gives equal weight to the kind of embodied self-knowledge that Enkidu gained through intercourse, which ends with him saying that he gained wide understanding, or say the social awareness that Gilgamesh slowly gains by having a peer, eventually accepting mortality and shedding hubris. This level is really the epic at its most humanitarian, a recognition that wisdom isn't only a matter for gods and scholars and heroes and great people like that, but for all men. And so it opens up for us this possibility to ask questions. That's enough for now. I'll come back to you in another video and say a few words about the next tablets 5 to 8, and I look forward to seeing you then.